Wellbeing for our SEN learners. And it's start of our December diet, Delivering Inclusive Education Toolkit, which is all about health, wellbeing, and inclusive practice to do with SEN, but also to do with our staff and ourselves as well. So let's jump straight in to the presentation. There's my title slide with my bit of waffle that I've just already gone through. And today we're going to have a bit of a focus on talking about our learners, so talking about our students and where health and well-being overlaps with those potential SEN needs that we have lurking in there as well. Let me just move my mouse. There we go. So what I've got on here is a child collapsed on the desk, and I think it's a pretty common one for us to see, definitely at this time of the year, to be fair. And it can be for a variety of reasons. It could just be that they didn't go to bed last night, or it could be that we perhaps had a late night for some reason, or maybe they're just feeling very overwhelmed with things. But we also have a number of students who have underlying medical needs that we may be seeing in school that parents are not necessarily seeing. So at home, they're seeing them from, let's say, 4 p.m. until 8 a.m., which is generally the time kids go to sleep, allegedly. At the weekend, families may well be taking part in activities, or maybe they're makes working weekends. They don't necessarily see their child during their waking hours, which sounds really strange, but it is the truth of the matter. So we tend to notice things before parents do. I always think back to my very early years of teaching. I think probably about my third year of teaching, and I had a young lad in my class called James, very red hair, um, and he used to. I'm going to use the phrase "space out," and it was really noticeable to me that he would kind of space out or zone out and then come back in again and not really have a clue about what was going on around him. He was well behaved, he was relatively academically capable, had some struggles, but he was really good at being a little bit of a sheep and following everybody else. He had a friend called Hannah who used to re explain things to him. And after a couple of weeks of working with him, I was in a year six class at the time. A couple of weeks of working with him, it's like, this isn't right, this isn't normal. And I asked his mum to take him to the optician. Came back, he needed a new prescription for his glasses, so we thought, oh, okay, let's see if that works. Didn't work. So I asked it to take him to the GP, and the GP said, oh, what are you seeing at home? And mum said, we don't see any of it. And I remember this is the days before lots of social media and tablets and all of the rest of it. And I said, "But I'm seeing it in the classroom. Go back to the GP and tell him what I'm seeing in the classroom." And it did actually turn out that this student was having seizures. He did have a form of epilepsy, and it was picked up and it was sorted for him. So we do see things that perhaps parents don't see. Equally so, we have to recognise that parents may also see things that we don't see. So maybe the child puts all of their effort and their energy into the day at school, and they absolutely collapse when they walk through the door at the end of the day. And we see that when we're talking about autism and ADHD and the Coke bottle effect and storing it all up and it bursts out at the end of the day. We see a perfectly behaved child all day at school and they explode when they get home. This is kind of like the reverse of that. We've got the child in school who is doing what everybody else is doing, trying to keep up, they're trying to follow, and they get home and they just crash and burn. So it could be lots of different reasons. We've got fatigue there, it could be their diet, it could be to do with sensory regulation, having to focus on, or not focus to be fair, on all of those noises and lights and things throughout the day, or it could be an unmet medical need. So something like diabetes, epilepsy, or maybe they have long COVID, maybe they've got something going on underneath the bonnet, if you like. Really, what we need is a whole school approach. So, what we're looking at here are some consistent habits that don't just apply to our students with SEN, but actually to everybody. And I think one of the problems we have with SEN is that we can become a little bit blinkered sometimes to the reason for things. So, let's say we have a student with dyslexia and they have their head down on the table, we may put it down to the fact that they're struggling with the literacy content and they're a bit overwhelmed by it and they just need a break from it for a few minutes. But actually, are we truly addressing what might be going on? Maybe they are genuinely ill. Maybe there is something else going on in there as well. So, what we really need to do is look at our consistent routines, predictable daily patterns, because if we've got a predictable daily pattern, the students get a predictable daily pattern, and then we start to see the anomalies. Thoughtful environments. So, can we reduce those sensory overloads so that they are not a factor in anything that we're seeing? An embedded curriculum. So that health and being aware of those signs within ourselves is woven into our teaching and learning. So our students learn how to recognize things for themselves. And then that staff culture, so that shared understanding and consistent practice. It's no use having one member of staff who says, slap a wet paper towel on it, and another member of staff who pulls out the dinosaur plasters and six bandages. We really need to have a consistent staff culture that sits behind this. Why does it matter? So, we do know that there is a link between health and learning, and the Public Health England has reported that students with persistent health needs have a significantly lower attendance. I'm like, yep, okay, that makes sense. We already know that low attendance can, I'm going to say can, correlate strongly with reduced attainment. So they're not able to necessarily reach their potential because they haven't always been in school at that point in time. So there was some data in 2024 which identified sensory regulation, sleep disruption, and chronic health disorders or chronic health conditions like asthma or diabetes, etc., as the common concerns that are brought up to a SENCO. Now, I'm not saying that a SENCO has to be in charge of medical issues within school. If you have a big enough school, chances are it could be dealt with by somebody else. However, what we see is firstly, there aren't usually enough members of staff in school. Secondly, that the SENCO is that nice, kind, nurturing person. They end up picking up medical needs as well. Um, Thirdly, we understand the Equalities Act, reasonable adjustments, and all of that business. But finally, we tend to notice the child and we're noticing the academic side of the child, and that ends up in a referral to us as the SENCO for this child's got an underlying need, but that underlying need might not be a special educational need, it could be a health need instead. So, it's complicated, it's not easy, but we do need to be aware of it. So I've got that kind of summarized at the bottom of that slide there. I've put the SEN learners, if they have health related barriers as well, they've got, well, sorry, SEN learners are 3 times more likely to also have a health related barrier to learning as well. I always remember doing a quick survey around my class, and it's nothing to go by because I wear glasses, and most of the people I talk to wear glasses. But it was really interesting that I had a higher proportion of students who were left-handed. I had a higher proportion of students who wore glasses or had had grommets. They're the things in your ears to help drain them. I had a higher proportion of students who had asthma, a higher proportion of students who had been born prematurely, which we do know there's a correlation there as well, and a higher proportion of students who had enuresis, which is nighttime bedwetting. So Yes, okay, it was only gathering some kind of data, and it didn't necessarily mean that one thing caused the other, but I did find it absolutely fascinating to look at those things. Left-handedness, my youngest son's left-handed, my dad was left-handed. Um, it's not a disability, it's a disadvantage sometimes, but it's not a disability as such. But I did find it really interesting how nearly three-quarters of the students who were on my SEN register, Key Stage 3, which was the cohort I was analysing at the time, were actually left-handed rather than right-handed. That does not mean you can go and hunt down all the left-handed students in your school. Okay. What are those kind of common health challenges that we tend to experience that are overlapping for us? I've kind of mentioned a couple of them already. Sensory processing difficulties, and that can also have an impact on our fatigue, our tiredness. It can also have an impact on our nourishment, our hunger cues, and our tolerance of busy environments, i.e., school. So, alongside that, if the student is struggling with their sensory processing, they're also less likely to want to come to school. They tend to be a lot of our EBSA students, and they may be avoiding school, and they may be saying that they are ill, but they're not actually ill, they're just trying to avoid a particular environment. We then have physical coordination, so we may have students with physical difficulties, so perhaps a lower stamina, maybe they're recovering from an illness, so chronic fatigue syndrome, and they're recovering. I had an operation last year, and I was told minimum 2 weeks off work, probably take you about 6 weeks. I'm just going to pause for a second. Okay. So minimum 6 weeks to start feeling back to normal again. I was like, yeah, okay, fine. So after a week and a half, I was like, yeah, I've got to do some work. Regretted it. And I have to say, it probably took me a good 3 to 6 months to actually recover. And I feel that I recover quite quickly from things. So I can have a cold one day and I'm absolutely fine the next day. I tend to get out of it fairly quickly. I used to call them my 24-hour colds. And I always used to have one on a Saturday, break up from school on the Friday night, get the snotty nose, be ill all day Saturday, well enough on a Sunday to do my planning for the following week. And it was really annoying. But I think it's important that we recognise that, a kid who's perhaps been off with what's the one going around school at the moment? Norovirus. So, yep, okay, they've had their time off whilst they've been ill, they've had their 48 hours clear. Well, that does knock a lot out of your system. Maybe they weren't eating properly. Maybe they're not hydrated fully. They've not been sleeping properly, or they've been out of their sleep routine. So we do need to really take that into consideration. And then I've put their sleep disruption as well, because that can affect things too. And the bottom bit's really key there, because those things can then give us barriers that look like inattention. They look like a behaviour problem. The kid's not doing what they're being asked to do, or it looks like they're not engaging with the lessons. And it's not that, they're just plain shattered. I was going to use another word then. Okay, a bit more on the sensory processing thing then. I am not a sensory processing expert. You need an OT for one of those. Ali Neal's very good. Um, we are looking there at students who avoid things, or they're over seeking things to balance out their arousal. So, when we have a consistent environment in school, that kind of helps with the sensory processing, it helps with the regulation. And it doesn't always indicate an underlying health need, it doesn't always indicate something else, but it can be a sign of something. So we do need to be aware. We need to make sure we've got those predictable routines, those transition points, that safe movement. We usually recommend sensory circuits. Sensory circuits, personally, I don't think they should be timetabled. A child needs a sensory circuit when they need a sensory circuit. Like saying to me, Abigail, it's It's 11:35, you need to go for your wee now. I don't need a wee right now, but I might need one in 25 minutes time. It's a little bit like that. We might not need to get up and fidget and move or whatever right now. Maybe we're enjoying the lesson, maybe we're enjoying what we're doing, but we might need it in 25 minutes time when our brains are overloaded. The slide's not moving on. This is to me, doesn't it? Come on. There we go. So, what does that look like in practice? We call them a sensory diet. So, that's kind of identifying what the child likes, doesn't like, what they need, what they don't need, whether they need to be stimulated or not stimulated, um, and putting those things in place. So, we always talk about assessing their individual needs. We look at planning the embedded strategies, teaching them some self regulation, which is where I said health needs need to go across the curriculum, and then monitoring social times because actually, whilst we do it in the classroom, are we checking what they're doing and using at their social times? We also need to consider nutrition. We have a lot of children who are fussy about what they eat. Talk about the age diet, don't we, with children with autism? My youngest son is an absolute pain with food. He goes through phases where he loves something, and then the next time you cook it for him, he doesn't like it, or he only likes one particular person in the house cooking something for him. So if he wants beans on toast, it has to be my 15-year-old son that cooks it for him. He doesn't like it if I've cooked it. It's weird. Um, but that's, children go through fads, they go through those phases. Most of them come out of the other side. We do have a lot of variety in there. We do have children who will avoid things. I am a very fussy eater. I've always been a fussy eater. I don't particularly like vegetables. Might eat them if they're hidden in something. I do eat peas and potatoes, which are apparently not a vegetable. But I don't like carrots and sweet corn. Do not come anywhere near me with cauliflower and Brussels sprouts or red cabbage or anything like that, unless it's pickled red cabbage because I like vinegar. So I'm a really, really fussy eater. And to be fair, over the last few years, again, I've noticed that my dietary habits, I like red meat, but red meat doesn't like me. So I have moved completely away from that. I only eat chicken and turkey. So yes, I am a meat eater. Sorry to the vegetarians out there and the vegans. Um, we make choices, but sometimes children are not making the right nutritional choices. They're restricting their diet. We have ARFID as well, don't we? Um, so we really need to consider what's going on with that nutrition. And are they getting a mix of things in there? Have they got some protein? Have they got some carbohydrate? Have they got some fats in there? Fats are actually good for you, help everything pass through. Um, so, how can we help? We need calm spaces. Visual menus can be really helpful, so they've not got to say what it is, especially if they can't say bolognese. And virtual exposure. So, like, we know some children don't like their foods touching, but they might try it if it's in a small bowl to the side. We're looking at those kinds of things. And we also know that there's a lot of families who are on the poverty line. They might not be eligible for free school meals. Maybe they sit just above that threshold, and I've been there. It's not easy. Every penny has to go towards other things, and your um, options. Maybe you can't afford to buy school meals, and although school dinners are relatively cheap, there isn't that much in them to be fair. But it is if you've got more than one child, it's actually cheaper to make sandwiches. So, but what those sandwiches have in them is questionable. Is it providing a nutritious diet for those children? We know a lot of families also are relying on food banks, and those food banks, they try to be nutritious. And we have a scheme locally to us where you can pay £10 and they will fill the bag up with fresh groceries for you, so the vegetables and the fruits and all the rest of it. But again, it goes back to, will the child actually even eat it if we've got that? Maybe the one thing that they do like eating is the one thing that's not actually in that bag. So it will have an impact. It has an impact on their concentration, it has an impact on their level of fatigue. Although it's not necessarily an underlying health matter, we do need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on it. I told you, being a SENCO is more than just looking at special educational needs, it's being a lawyer and an accountant, and now you're a chef and nutritionist as well. Okay, jump to, not sure. Nope, moved one. My mouse has got frozen again. There we go. So, physical activity. Now, physical activity, we do tend to notice some underlying medical needs here. So, we may be the early identifiers of something like dyspraxia or of retained autonomic reflexes or motor issues in students. So, parents, especially if it's their first child, may not be aware of some of the differences between their child and the milestones they're meeting and other children. We know there's a curve. I've never been good at sports at all. I have coordination of a gnat. I can play badminton though, but I don't have strength. So, and I don't have any stamina these days either. Um, we do tend to notice things in children. We're not consistent. Um, they could be indicating something else. So, whilst a health visitor is likely to have picked up on floppy baby or a child with dyspraxia, possibly if they're not walking early enough. That was the other one we looked at. When did the child start walking? Um, whilst they may have picked up on that, sometimes they don't. Always. Sometimes it isn't until the child is slightly older that those things come to the forefront. Maybe it's when we start to learn to tie shoelaces and the child just cannot coordinate how to do those. You're not usually expecting a 2-year-old to tie shoelaces or a 3-year-old, which is probably the last time a health visitor sees them. So it's not until they get to perhaps 6 or 7 years old and the teacher's saying, I'm still having to button their coat up for them at break time. Their shoelaces are constantly coming undone. Please get them Velcro. Or, all of those, they can't get changed for PE. Their clothes are inside out and they can't turn the right way round. It isn't until we get there that we might start noticing things. As I said, attendance can be impacted by health patterns. So it's not usually random. We do tend to notice that Mondays, they've had the weekend to calm down, relax, recover, if you like. And then by the time we get to Friday, our attendance is dropping. I think that applies to anybody, to be fair. We call Wednesday the hump day. But Friday, we generally are a little bit more tired. And it can also depend, though, on what your school week looks like. So I do know that some students, they've got PE on a Monday. So they recover over the weekend, they come in, they have PE on the Monday, it absolutely tires them out. Tuesday takes the hit, Wednesday they're back in school again, and then it slowly declines again for the rest of the week. So we, looking at those patterns, looking at those trends, doesn't necessarily have to be you, but it could be useful if you've got a student, especially if they're hitting that PA figure, to look at the pattern across the week and to look at where their lessons fall across the week. So, is it maybe they don't like science lessons, maybe they don't like geography, maybe they don't like Thursdays because they have to sit still all day, or maybe it's because they've got PE on Thursdays. Or is it more like this one, where we've got a child who's using the weekend to recover, especially if it's a sensory difficulty, and then they're slowly declining throughout the week? So we have our APDR model. We know APDR is. Um, what do we do? Well, we want to gather the information. What do we do with it? We plan. We're going to put something in place to support. And that might not be us. I'm going to come to that in a moment. We do. What are we going to do? And then we review it. So in this case, we're not necessarily looking at academic data. We may well be. But it's not going to be our main focus here. We're more looking at attendance, engagement, and well-being data. And by well-being data, I mean how comfortable that child is feeling within school. An inclusive health plan. Now, this is where I say it isn't always you. Uh, Certainly in my own experience, it used to be the school nurse that would help to write healthcare plans, um, or health plans. And we had a person who was in charge of the medical register. So, although I had oversight of it as the SENCO, I did have somebody who would make sure those plans were updated with the school nurse and to make sure any medications were dealt with and all the rest of that. I realised I was very lucky in that, and that was in a secondary school, to be fair. In a primary school, class teachers took responsibility for it. So we had that information. Um, but we definitely need external input into these. And I know that that is incredibly difficult to get hold of. But if we don't know how to handle a particular medical crisis, and for this particular one, I'm thinking of a student I had who had to take epilepsy medication if she had a seizure, and you had to give it within 2, 3 minutes of her starting the seizure. And there was a very specific method to it. It's far too graphic to go into here. Um, but if you didn't know how to do it and what to do, I could imagine there would be a lot of panic there. And I don't want, personally, to be responsible for writing that plan. I want that to have come from somebody who knows exactly what they're talking about, how to actually approach it, what to do. And I want that person to talk me through it and possibly give me a demo as well. That said, parents are very good at telling us what to do. Egg fed students, for example. Um, but everybody who is in contact with that child, whether it is a teacher, a TA, a P teacher, a school office very often, dinner ladies, somebody in the school kitchen, maybe even the caretaker, they all need to have access to that information. So, what we really want is jargon free language. What do we do? The actions, what have our families said about it? So, do we need to phone them up if anything happens? How are we going to review it? And then, what are the emergency procedures? I don't need to know what epilepsy is. I don't need to know the history of it. I don't pretend, well, maybe I need to know what the um, precursor signs are if the child has any precursor signs. Actually, I don't need a great big essay on a page. I just want to know what to do when it happens. End of. Don't need all of the fuss that goes with it. I've put also here though health and wellbeing pupil profiles. You can see that my AI can't spell snapshot on the left hand side. Um, and these are slightly different to a healthcare plan. So these are for students who perhaps have CMH needs, or maybe they are self harming, maybe they are a student who is deliberately restricting their food intake, so anorexia or bulimia. Um, these are the students where they don't quite fit under the health bit, but they fit under a well-being bit. So we might have a profile for them, which gives us a bit of personal information. So what do we know about them? What are their known triggers that might make this worse, especially if they're in a period of calm? What might increase that difficulty for them? What helps to bring them down to prevent them getting into that situation? And then If there are any emergency actions, so if they have taken um, something that they shouldn't have done, or they're taking some kind of action that they shouldn't be, what are our steps and who do we contact? And that might be a piece of paper, it could be something that is on your MIS. But again, it needs to be shared with individuals that need to know it. So it doesn't just mean one person, it means that it's got to be shared with everybody who needs to be aware of it. And we do need to review those regularly because those health needs will fluctuate more regularly than any academic needs would. I kind of just put there that, titles that we come across in school, so health passports. Use a passport for your SEN, you might use a health passport. It's like a one-page summary. It might be a wellbeing action plan, WAP, or it could be a medical care plan. So that's something I would usually expect a external professional to have written for me or with me, or at least give me advice. And many schools do actually use, I'm going to say, generic asthma and allergy plans. So you can pull those off specialist websites, and then they tweak them for the individual. So trying to make sure that, yep, okay, here's the allergy advice for this person, but actually their needle is a little bit different to that person there, their EpiPen needle or the type of EpiPen that they're using. So therefore, we're going to put exactly on there what type of EpiPen to use, or for asthma, or for anything like that. So um, you can use templates, you can use ready prepared generic asthma and allergy plans, making sure that if there is anything that is very tailored and specific to that child, that we have got that information. And I have put there that if the student also has a special educational need, because of course I'm coming at it from the SENCO perspective, try to link those two documents together. So if we're reading about the SEN, we're reading about the health and we're considering the health impact on the SEN, but also we're considering the SEN impact on the health. Because of course, if a child has a special educational need, maybe they are not as aware of their trigger signs. Maybe they're not as aware of the difference between their blue inhaler and their brown inhaler, and we need to step in quicker. So we just need to make sure we've got all that, dot the I's and cross the T's. I've put their regulation tools, so it's mostly for our sensory students, but also our SEMH students. So, they could be overlapping there. I think they're kind of standard now. So my tips for you are around teach the use of the tool while we're using it, model the use of it. So if I ever brought anything into the classroom, you can guarantee I had a good play with it. Allow choice, and then review the impact. And if it's not having an impact, it's probably not needed. But that choice one is element. Children need to feel that they've got agency in things. And it could be something as simple as sitting in the darker corner of the room. And that doesn't mean you need dimmer switches. It could just be that you have an area of the room where you've got blinds on two sides. Just makes it slightly darker than the rest of the room. And that helps the student who's feeling that those overhead, fluorescent, flashing, buzzing, annoying things, can you tell what irritates me? Um, just gets reduced. It just makes them feel that little bit safer. So, carrying on with that sensory friendly environment thing, I think this helps lots of our students, but you could say it helps those students with health needs as much as those with sensory needs. So reducing that visual clutter, because that helps lower the cognitive load, and we already know if we're not feeling very well, it's hard to concentrate on things, so we can do that. I'm thinking of a student I had who had quite severe menstrual pains, period pains. And she used to find it horrendous in classrooms to concentrate on things. But if you gave her the work on paper and she wasn't required to necessarily listen to you or look at you or engage with anybody else, she would quite happily curl up with a wheat bag and just get on with it. So I think it's important to recognize that, to use those strategies with students. Again, I've put lighting quality, natural light where possible, not this time of the year, obviously. Acoustic control. So, have you got one of those really hollow sounding classrooms, or can we put some soft furnishings in to reduce the echo? Because it can get really annoying. And then movement pathways. So, what I'm thinking of there is your students who perhaps have toileting issues. Maybe they need to dash to the toilet quickly. Maybe they don't get much of a warning about bowel or bladder movements. So, have they got a clear pathway to get out of that classroom? And I know it sounds really, really um, like I'm teaching Granny to suck eggs a little bit, but you'd be surprised how many times we've got the student with the gastric issues who is sat furthest from the door and can't get over everybody's bags and all the rest of it to try and get out of the room to go and do whatever they need to go and do. This is getting far too graphic. Okay, in terms of chronic conditions, so could be our SEN learners, might not be an SEN learner though. But we do have those students who have diagnosed chronic conditions, chronic meaning that it's not going to go away anytime soon and that it is consistent and persistent and has an impact on day to day life. So we need to be aware of the legal guidance. So we have the Equalities Act, of course, which will protect a lot of those things under the reasonable adjustments. So um, s- not quite a disability, but a lot of them will fall under that disability label. Um, but we also have a document by the DFE on supporting pupils with medical conditions, and that is a legal statutory framework which we must work to. So, to give you an example in that one, if you have a student who requires pull ups or is not toilet trained, um, then you cannot send that child home to be changed, and you cannot expect the parents to come in and change them. So it is their medical condition that dictates that, as opposed to parenting not bothered to teach them how to do it. Quite a different circumstance. Um, but if they have a medical condition that dictates it, then we have to accommodate it within the school. Same as with any physical therapy, any occupational therapy, any other kind of therapy that we want to go on in school, those things have to be accommodated. If a child needs their inhaler, they must have access to their inhaler. We can't remove it from them. If the child with ADHD can't take the long delayed one and they have to take it at lunchtime as well, we can't say, oh no, you can't come to school. We have to make processes and protocols in place for that child to be able to do that. If they are on a dose of antibiotics and they have to take it 3 times a day, then one of those is likely to fall during the school day. We can't restrict them from it. Like, guidance is definitely worth reading and making sure that we are compliant with it. Um, There's also that one around privacy and autonomy. And I remember this student very, very well. So she was diabetic and needed to blood test and take her insulin. And she was very competent at doing it when she joined us in year 7. So I'm going for a secondary scenario here. She was very, very competent at doing it. She would go to her dance classes, she would go to um, weekend, she'd go out with her friends and she'd take everything with her. Her parents had brought her up to be very, very independent and know what she was doing and when she needed to do it. Unfortunately, I worked in a school that said can't have a child walking around with their drugs on them. So their ruling was that she had to come to a specific space to collect her kit if she felt that she needed to test herself. This is days before Dexcoms, um, and that the insulin had to be stored with us and we had to monitor it and we had to write it down and all the rest of it. And her parents fought alongside me um, to have that changed. And they were like, I don't see why she can't do it in the dining hall because that's when she needs to test her blood sugars as she goes into the dining hall, whether that's at morning break or at lunchtime. Or if she's in the middle of a lesson, she's probably feeling faint, which is one of her first signs. I don't want her having to walk all the way through the building to get to your designated space or to wait for somebody to go there, collect the stuff, and bring it back to her. And we fought that battle and we won it. And it's really important. So, we may well have some students we have to monitor. We may well have some students who want privacy to undertake those things. So, not everybody is happy sitting in the dining hall jabbing themselves. Um, Certainly don't want them doing it in the school toilets. It's not incredibly hygienic in there. We do need to make sure that the child has the autonomy in that. So if they want that privacy, if they want that reassurance, if they want to have somebody else with them, then we accommodate that. If they want to be independent, they want their autonomy, they're going to have to live with it for life. We should be empowering them to do that. And of course, it's going to be age dependent. And then we need our emergency protocol. So, what's going to happen if something goes wrong? Always plan for if it goes wrong. Put here fatigue, sleep, and cognitive load. So, as somebody who doesn't sleep very well, it can be really, really draining. And you can get to a certain point of the day where somebody says something to you, you can ask them to say it 6, 7, 8 times, and you have got not a clue. I always talk about it going in one ear, bypass the brain, and out the other, because I can repeat what you've just said, but I can't actually process it. So, as we go through a school day, we change subjects constantly. We don't stick to the same thing. So we're jumping between PE to maths to science to English to art to music. We've got break time in there where we've got to socially interact with people. We've got lunchtime where I've got the smell of the hall and whatever else is going on. And it can build up throughout the day. So, whilst you might be able to cope for the first 3 lessons, by the time we've got to lunchtime, we've had that bit of downtime and we've got that lovely food coma, not on a school dinner, obviously, but you've got that lovely food coma that comes after dinner as well. We've had a bit of nourishment. And then the afternoon is like, God, this is dragging and I can't get into it. So we really need to be considerate of that. Um, I know primary school kind of approach is to do literacy, numeracy in the morning, and then the more creative subjects, foundation subjects in the afternoon, which is, you know, you have that ability to choose to do that. Just be aware that also we have the flip side to that with teenagers, in that teenagers do not wake up early in the morning and may be more alert in the afternoon. Um, but we, in secondary schools, the timetable's a bit more jiggled around. So maths might be first lesson on a Monday and last lesson on a Friday, and you're going to get something entirely different out of the classes then. We need to think about it. Our teachers need to think about it as well, and that if a child is, you know, ill, or if they are on our SEN register for a neurodiversity, they tend to have weaker sleep patterns, or if they are somebody who is recovering from something, then their journey throughout that day may be getting more fatigued, more overload. So it builds up, is what I'm basically trying to say there. But we can help. We can break things into smaller tasks. We can do what we did for my young lady with her period pains and give it her on paper and just let her do it. We might give them rehearsal time. Just reduce the unnecessary demands. Just bring it right the way down where possible. For their emotional well-being, because that has an impact on health as well. So children need to feel safe. They need to feel a connection to somebody in the school or with the school. They need to be able to express themselves. They need to know how to regulate themselves, and then they need the overarching thing that kind of sits around all of that is the predictability. So if we've got all of those things and we set this nice, relaxed, emotional tone for the classroom, and we're more likely to have good regulation going on for our students, with our students. So parents know our children really, really well. So if it is a diagnosed health condition, they're more likely to have that information than we are, because they deal with it 24/7, 365 days of the year. And they only give them to you for 185 days of the year and only for 6 hours on each of those days. That's despite me saying they spend most of their waking hours with you. Um, our parents have had them for a longer period than us as well. So checking in with our parents, are we using the same terminology? So I do know, and I'm going to use the epilepsy as an example again. I prefer to use the word seizure. I do have some families that use the word fits, which I my belief is that that's an outdated term, but that's their choice. That's what they call it. That's what they want to use. So when I'm talking to that child, I use that family's language. When I'm talking about that child, perhaps with a healthcare professional, or if I'm talking about it with members of staff, I will use seizure because that's my language. So making sure we're using that shared language when we're talking with families and children. And then what are our agreed responses between home and school? So if home is saying to the child, oh yeah, if you're tired today, you don't have to do anything. Whereas we're saying, well, actually, yeah, we recognize you're tired today. Let's see how much you can get done. Those are two different messages. And one of them is I'm dismissing everything. And the other one is saying, let's see. And it might mean they still don't get anything done with our let's see, but it gives them the opportunity to try rather than just setting in this, I don't have to do it. Uh, Working with health professionals, good luck. So GPs, paediatricians, OT, SALT, CAMS, you can get hold of any of them. We might get a short call, we might get a conversation, we might get a report, we might get a generic pamphlet sent through the post. Sorry, that was said through gritted teeth because they used to annoy me, especially when you'd had about 7 students go through a particular paediatrician who used to like to send me the ADHD recommendations for schools leaflet. And there were 7 of them that had gone through in one half term, and she sent one with every single student. You've sent it to me now. Please stop sending it. Anyway, so have we got any initial contact? Do we have any clarification? Sometimes parents, especially if it's new diagnosis, might not understand it. So can we help parent? Do we need to explain something to them? Joint planning. So if they're able to come to an SEN review, especially if they're on the SEN register, can we get them to come and join that? Because it is supposed to be an EHCP if we get to that stage. And then that open dialogue. I have to be honest, I did have a good relationship with our local GPs and paediatricians. We didn't have an OT. Our SALT was hit and miss because we were secondary, so get that bit. CAMS, we actually had a very good relationship with, and EPs. So they would come in and they would attend those meetings. And actually, one of the reasons they were, brain trauma in, trust, they're really good as well. But one of the reasons that they came in and one of the ways we actually sold it was every time they came to do something with us, whilst they were coming about one specific child, we were taking that knowledge on board to be able to apply to other students. So we were treating it almost like a CPD session with a working example. And that then meant that when we were making new referrals or when we were discussing new students in the future, we weren't always going back to basics. We'd got that involvement. And that was the way I sold it to them. And they really appreciated that. So you're struggling. Try that one. Oh, a couple more slides to go. So, nutritional support frameworks there. Can we help families with food intake? It's not always easy, and I do not expect you to become a dietitian. I do not expect you to give up every lunchtime so that you can sit and spoon feed little Freddie. But But what can you do to support? So, can we give them a calm environment? Do they need a smaller environment or somewhere else? Consistent routine comes up all the time for me. Um, can we track for the parent what they're eating and not binning? And can we have some timely referrals? So, if we are spotting something that is to do with food quirkiness, can we actually give that information to somebody a bit more promptly? Because that may well help families, and sharing it with families may well help them to get external help that we can't necessarily access. Movement to mindfulness. So we know that mindfulness activities can be helpful. I'd say they irritate me a bit because whenever I see mindfulness, and I get really excited about going to see a mindfulness session in a school, and it is a worksheet for them to colour in, I'm thinking that's not mindfulness. That's really not what it is. Um, Making sure that if we're using that kind of terminology, are we actually delivering mindfulness, or are we just delivering a distraction technique using pencil, crayons, and the photocopying budget? So we can model things. Um, I actually had some students who, yes, we used to do the mindfulness, but we did do the stretching and the control breathing and all the rest of it. They actually preferred doing Sudoku puzzles and word searches rather than colouring in. Can't say I blame them. Um, or some students who would prefer to just sit, close their eyes, cuddle a teddy bear, and think about something, reflect on something, really thinking about those things and demonstrating those things too. Using in between transitions. So, can we maximize their impact? So, teaching students to do that calm breathing as they're moving from one activity to another. And then I've put there keeping it brief. So, seeing a mindfulness session scheduled for 45 minutes, I do kind of cringe sometimes, especially like I say, when they're getting that worksheet to colour in for 45 minutes. It starts to become an art lesson rather than something that's going to help them to focus and get their mind back in the right place. So, really do think about what you mean by mindfulness when you're actually putting that in place for students. I've put on there calm with that little picture. It doesn't have to be something we do with one child, it can be something we do with the whole class. A bit of stretching, a bit of movement, a very brief activity that's mostly done independently, mostly done for themselves, not for other people. My numbers are made up again, as you know. So, embedding staff CPD models. So, can we have really short CPD sessions, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, rather than longer ones, where we're just sharing some of these ideas, where we're talking about regulation, medical conditions, how epilepsy. Well, just give you a tidbit of information here, I suppose. I was really shocked to learn that one of my students, whenever she had, so she'd do her learning, and then she used to have nocturnal seizures, so overnight, and she would come back in the following day and she could not do what we had been doing the previous day. And we kept putting, I'm going back quite a long time in my career here, but we kept putting it down to the fact that she was special educational needs, that she had learning difficulties, and that as soon as she wasn't doing that thing, she forgot how to do it. It wasn't until we actually had a meeting with her epilepsy nurse who came in and said, "You do realise that every time she has a seizure, because it's happening at night, all that new learning and those neural pathways that we build during our sleep are being destroyed. You are lucky if she can keep 10% of what was going on the previous day." And that was a real shock for me to realize that these students who we frustrated with. I'll come at it from the teacher side. We can get frustrated with them because we know they can do it, and we might have a couple of days where they can do something, and then they come in and they can't do it. And it's like, you did this yesterday, or you got that spelling right. Why can't you do it now? It's understanding that actually this is not in their control. And I suppose, epilepsy is very specific, but it is destroying those neural pathways. If you think about it, any student that has a sleep deficit, so a lot of our neurodiverse students, they also are possibly not building up those neural pathways. They're not strengthening them. They're not getting that myelin sheath over them that stops the electrical current going anywhere else. So that then they're kind of not reinforcing things as well as should do. It takes them much longer to learn than a student who's getting 8 hours sleep every night. Um, just giving that bit of information to your staff could make the light bulb go on, could make them go, oh, well, that explains a lot. And then they might forget it, but at least you've shared it with. Um, we want to increase our staff confidence. I always talk to you about autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Do they understand the child? Do they have the competence, the skills, which we're delivering through the CPD? Um, and do they have the autonomy, the choice to make? And that all impacts on their confidence to choose to do those things. So if we give them that drip fed information, we can get that into them. And then, number of sessions per year, I put 6 there, but that's just a random number. But thinking about regular input, just doing epilepsy in epilepsy week, so November was epilepsy month, um, just doing it 1 week or 1 month is a bit disingenuous. It's it's not fair on students. It's one of the reasons I don't like ADHD day or dyslexia week or anything like that. I really don't like them because it's almost like that condition is only important for 1 day, and it isn't. It's a year long, sometimes lifelong impact for that individual. And we shouldn't be addressing it because a calendar says so. We should be addressing it because it is a need that is needed in our school at that point in time. So if I've got a student who comes into my school, I'm going to use epilepsy as the example again, and I need to tell my staff that they've got epilepsy, I can't wait until May when it just happens to be on the schedule. I need to tell them straight away, and I need to revisit it at regular periods throughout the year, especially if that child has a crisis. And we might need to revise strategies. We might need to give everybody a quick refresher on something. Like, I know that sounds like I'm um, being a bit dictatorial there, but I'm really quite passionate about the fact that we shouldn't be doing something just because it says it on a calendar. We should be doing it because it's needed at that point in time. And scrap the flipping calendar if we have to. Yes, we've planned to do ADHD next week, but actually we need to talk about asthma. It's more important. Do it, is what I want to say. But quality intervention teaching there, so rather than quality first teaching. Um, yes, we want our quality first teaching, but we need to be aware of our interventions. And I think sometimes we think an intervention is going to solve all the problems, and we forget that we've got a child in front of us who has difficulties. And that's why they're in the intervention in the first place. You all know my bugbear about children with ADHD getting more literacy and numeracy rather than actually addressing the ADHD. Um, we really need to think about our students with dysregulation, fatigue, underlying medical conditions, hunger, any of those things, and think about what's the impact going to be for them in this particular intervention on this particular day. And am I actually going to get anywhere with them? So, checking the regulation state before we start, make sure we've got those breaks and regulation pauses built in. It's no point trying to deliver that 45-minute session for the full 45 minutes. We still need to treat it like we would treat quality first teaching, a lesson. We need the breaks in there. Just the pacing. So if they are tired or their attention level is waning, can we flip to something else? Can we change it slightly? Can we go a bit faster? Can we go a bit slower? What do we need? And then help the pupils recognize their emotional state. So kind of getting them cued in on it a little bit as well. Making sure that they're going from you to wherever they're going next, ready for that next session. I think that can also be more important than necessarily getting through your content sometimes, because what you're doing there is you're regulating the child to then access the content in their teaching lesson rather than actually delivering their intervention. But that's probably more important. Make sure we've got it embedded in our policy and practice. I don't tend to look at health policies very often in school. Sometimes I get handed them. If the SEN policy references it, I will look at it. Make sure it references that DFE guide. That's one thing I would recommend. And make sure you have the Equalities Act mentioned in there as well. Make sure every member of staff has access to it. Your local offer should signpost them to various things, but if you've got a family that's just had a new diagnosis of something, it can be helpful if you've got some of this information. Again, Padlet's really good for storing something like this. But gather the information as you go. It's not something you need to sit and do. It is something you gather as you go through your career. So I don't have mine anymore, but I used to have a really good lever arch folder back a while again, with loads and loads of different leaflets in it, including those 7 copies of the ADHD one, um, where I gathered information from different services. And whenever a parent came to me to talk about something, I was able to go, oh, do you know what? I've got a leaflet on there. Let me just grab it for you. Pull my lever arch folder off, pull it out of one of the poly wallets and go, here you go, there's some information in this. Not from me, but it's this here. So just trying to gather that information to help yourself, but help families as well. We do know there are constrained resources in schools, so a lot of what we're asking for with medical needs, though, is not, and health needs, is not expensive equipment. Yes, okay, we might need a adult changing bed or something like that, but most most of what we are doing, we are not funding it. It's not coming from us, so we don't have to buy insulin. We don't have to buy the ADHD tablets. We don't have to buy the needles. Yeah, okay, we might need a supply of plastic gloves and aprons. But most of what we're being asked to do, we don't have a cost associated in terms of product. We may have a staffing cost. So if we need to have a member of staff on standby, or if we need to have some staff trained for something, usually there's a cost associated. A lot of the NHS stuff is very reasonable. So I think the epilepsy training I did was probably about £50. There are some online things if you've got somebody who's reasonably medically competent and they just need a refresher. If you want practice pens for epilepsy, you can usually ask the family if they can get one from their epilepsy nurse, or there's actually a website you can go to and you can order one, and they will send you an epi injector so you can actually practice. Blimey neck, you don't have to hit them hard. And that's only because I had to get one a few weeks ago for a very specific purpose. And then what we're hoping to see is that this has an impact on behaviours. But by behaviours, I don't mean negative behaviours. So it could be an improved attendance. It could be that that child just feels better about coming to school. Bring it all together. So staff understanding, responsive environment, what the pupil wellbeing, and then of course what falls into that is we can have the academic learning that goes with it. Otherwise we wouldn't have some of those things. I think what's the phrase? Um, oh goodness. Maslow before Bloom. No, Bloom before Maslow. Bloom before Maslow. Maslow before Bloom. Get it the right way around. We've got to have our staff understanding, our responsive environment, our pupil well-being in place before we can do the learning, before we can do the Bloom. So really making sure we've got that. The key points to take away, I like a slide like this. Health-based barriers could be our students with SEN. Um, they might be health-based rather than academic-based. We do need a different approach. It needs to be a whole school approach. Consistency is really important. We need that equal weight in our planning, so we do need that sensory information, that physical needs. It deserves an equal weight alongside academic information. We do need some consistency, staff confidence, and then making sure we are working with those essential partners. So what might you do with this information? Check your health plan. If you haven't got one, write one. Look at the patterns, because that can tell you an awful lot, and it might start to explain some of your SEN patterns. Update your profiles if necessary, or get somebody to update those. Audit the environments, and then that will help you to see the overlap between SEN and health needs. And then, if necessary, adapt any templates to provide tools for your phase and context. Early years is going to be very different to Key Stage 5. And then onto my last slide, just put there, got any questions, you know where to find me. And the website is there as well, which is sensiblesenco.org.uk. So if I stop presenting and go to that one, be back. Thank you so much for attending this session. I hope it was useful for you. I know it's a little bit different. It's not quite SEN, but it is SEN. It's looking at that overlap. It's really understanding things are never straightforward, and that we need to make sure we're aware of them. And we wear lots of hats, and nurse is one of them as well sometimes. So really hope you enjoyed it. Do join me for a few other sessions over December, where we are looking at a whole variety of different health, wellbeing and inclusive practice. Take care.